Right now, we're going to bring on Alan Adler, our Detroit bureau chief, for an update that I don't think a lot of folks were expecting out of Mack Trucks over the weekend. We, of course, had that union contract come through last week, the no vote to ratification over the weekend. Alan, tell us what happened and what this means now for our next steps.
Well, you've got, Kaylee, good morning. You've got a strike now at Mack Trucks, both in Pennsylvania and parts depot in Baltimore, one in Jacksonville, Florida, and then probably most importantly at an engine making plant that makes engines for both Mack and Volvo trucks because they are siblings under the Volvo group. A bit of a surprise unless you want to sort of do revisionist history and look at all the signs that this might have been happening. It appears for now that Mack Truck has kind of hitched its wagon to the UAW negotiations/strike in Detroit. That has been a targeted affair where Shawn Fain, the new UAW president, has picked certain plants for General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, the parent company of Chrysler and other brands, to just sort of put a little bit of pressure on, a little pain on, but continue the negotiations. Well, the things that have been spilling out suggest that the numbers being thrown around, not just the demands, but the actual offers being made by the automakers are higher than what was offered to Mack. Now, that's not unusual because when you think of the size of the two businesses, the automotive industry and the truck manufacturing industry, they're very different. I mean, maybe a tenth of the size for trucks that automotive is. And so you're not talking about anywhere near the numbers. It's extremely cyclical, as we all know, in trucking. It's fleet driven. There's very few individual new truck buyers, obviously some O&Os, but they're usually in the used market. So ideally, we're looking at a situation where I think there's some envy on the part of the Mack workers. They've also been egged on extremely hard, not just by Shawn Fain, the president of the International, even though the International did back the tentative agreement that was rejected, but also by the World Socialist Group, which calls itself the Rank and File Committee. And this group has been basically pointing up all of the weaknesses in the agreement, the tentative agreement, including the lack of a cost of living adjustment, which the union gave up back in 2009, and also tiered wages, which they agreed to in 2007, both during the Great Recession. So now you've got a situation where it looks like the Mack workers anyway, want to see how the situation in Detroit plays out. Does that mean staying on strike for however long? I don't know. But I do think everyone's pretty surprised. And the vote, 73% against, was really huge. That's not a close vote.
Definitely an overwhelming vote there with the majority. And Alan, when we're looking at the situation, do we have any initial numbers on some really figures being floated around for tentative agreements that are really being demanded? And when we're looking at demands being met, does this kind of set the bar for an entity within the strike to really kind of say, hey, this is what we're getting, this is what you should push for?
Well, Anthony, it's hard to say. I mean, on the face of it, the agreement, the tentative agreement looked pretty good, and it was 19% pay increase over 5 years. That's 1 year longer for a contract than they had. It had been 4 years. 10% of that would have been upfront upon ratification, and then about 2.5% for the other 4 years. You had 1 year go away in terms of the grow-in or the time it takes to get to the top wage. You had a $3,500 signing bonus, some 401k adjustments for people that don't take health benefits from the union. So there were a number of good things in there. But again, these two issues that really are at the center of the UAW strike in Detroit, cost of living adjustments and two-tier wages, seem to be sort of back on the table now, if you will, at Mack. These are things that probably got discussed, but I think were sort of kicked to the curb because, look, the automotive contract, as I said earlier, and the trucking contract have never really been the same. It's not a single master agreement. The Mack Trucks agreement is one master agreement, and whatever the UAW agrees to with the Detroit Three, they've always sort of played a targeted company and then, had that adopted at the other companies based on specific needs. This year, the UAW went after all three of the Detroit automakers at one time, which is unprecedented. So, it's a new week. And I think the issue now is there'll be a bit of a cooling off period. And then, they will get back together and resume negotiations. It really depends. This is a second time now that we've seen this at the Volvo Group. 2 years ago at Volvo, there was a 5-week strike, and the workers rejected 3 tentative agreements before Volvo finally, after a split vote on the last one, just implemented what it wanted to do and what it put out there. So, this idea that, following what your leaders say is getting to be less and less common in union negotiations.
So, Alan, last week we talked about how part of the interesting things about this contract was that addition of 30 minutes to the workday, the opportunity to earn that extra estimated $3,000 a year for the workers. And as we mentioned, that local chapter in Pennsylvania saying, hey, our job security depends on our ability to be flexible and to work with these guys. Clearly, that sentiment did not pass down through the rank and file as we so speculated last week, right? Was there any indication about if that was one of those kind of breaking points that the rank and file wasn't willing to get over, that extra 30 minutes for $3,000 doesn't equate out?
I don't know if the money part of it really played into it. I think this whole idea that we don't like what you as our negotiators came up with is what we were hearing. And it was quite noisy from one report. Again, it was the Workers' World Group, or the Socialist Group, that said that at the ratification meeting, which was to go over the agreement on Saturday, that about 400 people showed up, and all but one of them voted no, when asked whether they would vote yes or no on the agreement. That wasn't the actual vote. That occurred yesterday. But the idea that there was a lot of booing and jeering and things like that suggests that we've got a bit of a fissure. Now, there's a player in this that has not really come to fore yet, but his name is Will Lehman. And Will is a Mack truck worker who ran for the presidency of the International Union. He did not get very far. He actually sued because he didn't think that the turnout was right. And he was backed by the socialists. And basically, he was sort of speaking on Saturday at this ratification meeting, and I think riling people up, honestly. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes it's said that, look, the bag of money, which we talked about last week, the signing bonus, will get a deal done, right? Maybe it won't be, 80% approval, but you'll get over the line. And I think the idea now that, you've got somebody out there who did run for president, but didn't get very far, kind of riling up these workers. I don't think I saw that coming myself. I mean, I knew about Will Lehman. I had followed some of his activity, but it does appear that you've got a pretty good socialist fervor, if you will, inside this negotiation now. So we'll see how all that plays out.
Definitely a breaking news story here. Alan, thanks so much for bringing this to our attention and giving us the updates. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again throughout the week, especially with Truck Tech coming up.
Thank you so much.